Awesome.
Okay,
Go
so
ahead.
we're gonna start with, oh, thank you. Board reports, sorry.
Did you turn that on?
Everyone's eating, so does anyone want to go first?
I'll
Just
go
go around
first.
there?
I'll go first.
Okay.
My mouth is empty and I have no report.
There
There you go.
Brian?
I'll be brief. I just have some good news from Dubuque. As some of you may know, I'm involved with the Holy Family school system there, and during the pandemic, starting in February, ending April 1, we raised nearly $25 million.
Wow.
But the very interesting part is the $10 million challenge grant from a local businessman who is not Catholic, whose children didn't go to our schools. But because of the benefit he perceived that having a co-system in the community meant to the Dubuque area community. So I thought, I mean, this person's truly a supporter of education. His generosity is not extended to only our schools, but I just thought that was great. And the money is about 6 million for 3 elementary schools, additions and replacement of 1, but the other 19 million will be an endowment for tuition aid and an endowment for
Wow.
teacher compensation. So just wanted to share that.
That's wonderful. Ready?
Just briefly, I have been on the NASB's early childhood workforce, and they just sent out a report that's done by the National Institute of Early Education Research. And I wasn't sure I was reading it right, so I talked to Brad and Jay before they left. But according to this, the statewide voluntary preschool program in Iowa is doing really well in terms of meeting benchmarks. We are at 8 out of 10 benchmarks that are met. Great news. But the number of kids enrolled in pre-K is pretty dismal, I think. So I think the next challenge for us to address is how to get more kids into the voluntary pre-K programs across the state, because I think they're doing pretty well if we can get the kids there. So that's all.
Thank you. Now. John?
Went to the, where I presented at the workshop for the school business officials, and I was asked how it went. I go, I thought it went well, but I'll get to the participant evaluations and then I can tell you if it went well or not. Been doing some volunteering locally. I was at a track meet this week, and somebody pointed out the Lebo girl to me. So I got to see.
Oh, were you there?
I was working the backstretch.
Oh, I didn't know
They said
that.
a lot. I had some Grundy Center fans standing next to me over on the other side and got talking with them, and I said, well, I know a couple of people from Grundy Center and Harry Dole.
Yeah.
And then they pointed out Jeff Dole was there.
Mhm.
And I said, well, I know Ann Lee. Well, I think Ann's in the stands maybe. I'm working on the facilities committee for Iowa Falls School District. They're trying to build a new elementary school. And just worked on teacher appreciation, last night for a local organization promoting that. And probably, oh, and I did see Hannah run at Norwalk.
Oh.
That's cool.
And probably what's least interesting to you, but maybe more interesting to maybe one person in this room, is I'm on a golf league team. And every year, our team name is the mascot, whoever wins the men's NCAA basketball tournament. Unfortunately, we're the Bears. We're waiting to be the Hawkeyes or Cyclones.
Look at his full, have you seen the shoes,
know.
like this from head to toe, tie? That's great.
What are your socks?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
Wow. All decked out.
Yeah, we don't need any more than that.
Thank you.
Hmm.
Georgia or Kim? I think Georgia took a bite. Kim, you want to go? Sorry.
Hey guys, so last time I came with a quick highlight in our STEM programming, we're ramping up. We actually meet tonight with 5 of our computer science high school interns. And then our programming starts with, we're targeting 80 students for the summer, all STEM related. And then we have the opportunity to partner with Iowa State on a STEM grant. So we're really excited about that. One of our board members is a professor. So there's power in board members. Wow, yeah. Lastly, we're monitoring, I don't think there's a state filing bill that passed through the Senate and was put on hold in the House. And it's not under Department of Ed. I think it's under Iowa Student Aid. And I think that's why it's not on the legislation report. But it centers around increasing aid for students that want to go into education from $3,500 to $7,000. And it's sitting in the House, and I think it was deemed, last time I looked at the status, as what is the verbiage is basically put on for next legislature. But if there's any insight of how we can move that forward, and because one of our responsibilities as board members is to advocate for policies, if I understand correctly, that's what's on the website. So anyway, it will help. It was beneficial. It increases the aid, but then it also gives some level of priority with trying to reduce the minority gap by giving some level of, it's basically helping with minorities, but all students that go into education. So I have a really, this is one of the action items that we had under the equity committee when it was active. And it just will really help with the pipeline in general. So getting more educators in the pipeline. So that's pretty much what's going on in the Kim Wayne world.
Thank you. Georgia?
Okay, now I'm not eating. Well, first of all, one thing I wanted to recognize is that I apologize. I haven't been there for a few meetings for us on our side for Hy-Vee since this pandemic. Just things have not shut down. They've not slowed down. They've been crazy. Trying to keep all of our employees and everything safe, and all that falls under me. And so I just apologize that there are meetings I just have not been able to make, only because we've had executive team meetings here. Otherwise, I would push everything else aside, with the exception of those executive team meetings. So I just wanted to recognize that. It's not how I like to operate. So I just wanted to point that out. The other thing I wanted to just say as a parent, I don't know how many of you currently have kids in the school district, but I just wanted to provide feedback from just parents and how grateful they are for their kids to be able to be in school, and that school districts have managed to, find ways to have kids there. And I know that we all play a strong role in that as well. But just the feedback from parents and the feedback from students is, as we wind up the year, has just been a lot of gratefulness that has come forward. And I don't know if that's something that you guys get the opportunity to hear. I know oftentimes you get to hear, or we get to hear the things that maybe aren't as grateful. So if you're not out there with a kid in school, you may not get the opportunity to hear as much of that. So I thought I would pass that along as well, just as kind of a little bit of an update. And then just from the business side of things, and what's interesting is this last report that we had, and looking at, the grade level reading and thinking about just the workforce struggles that all businesses are having right now in hiring. And some of that is policy related, but how do we do a better job of engaging earlier with some of these students and school districts to be a better partner to help these students so that we have that stronger workforce when they're getting out. So that's just something I was reflecting on as that presentation was put forward, because and for all of you who are part of a business, it's super difficult to find help right now. And so I just think, what are better ways? It just makes you think that we could be a stronger partner with our education to make sure we've got a good workforce going forward. That's it.
Thank you. Did I miss anyone? Did myself? Mic on?
No, I don't think so.
Oh, okay. I don't have any reports. Wait. Should we continue then?
Yep.
Oh, okay.
Move on. Thank you, everybody.
I gotta go to my agenda, I'm sorry.
Okay.
Oh. Annual condition of secondary career and technical education report. Hello. Yes, I come up with short titles for these things.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. I'm Dennis Harden, and I'm the Bureau Chief for Technical Education here at the department, and it's really a pleasure to be able to be here in person to present to you. I presented to you all last fall with this information, and it's a pleasure to be here to see you all face to face. I'm relatively new to the department, so I came in January of 2020. So
Right before the world fell off. of
right
it.
before I know. So
Nice welcome, huh?
no, it was a great transition.
That's good.
Well, so I'm going to be presenting the annual condition of secondary career and technical education report for the year 2020. This report provides an in-depth look at secondary CTE over the 5-year period covering academic years 2016 to 2020. Before I begin, I would like to thank my colleagues in the Division of Community College Workforce Preparation for their work in putting the report together. It's a huge task and it takes a number of staff to put this particular report together, so I do really appreciate that. There's 2 sections in the report. The first one is trends in secondary career and technical education. And then the second area is 4 emerging areas of focus for implementing high quality career and technical education. This is a rather lengthy 63-page report, so I'm only going to be covering a few highlights. So the first chart reports secondary CTE courses taught since 2016. In 2020, 9,027 secondary CTE courses were offered in Iowa, which is a 1.4% increase in the previous year, with a compound annual growth rate of 2.6% over a 5-year period, which is the 2016 through 2020. This chart also reports the change of college credit contracted CTE courses. The proportion of college credit contracted CTE courses decreased steadily. In 2016, these courses only accounted for 23.4% of the total secondary CTE courses, whereas in 2020, 30% of all secondary CTE courses were college credit contracted courses, which is a little over 42% increase. And then the second chart on this slide displays the total number of secondary CTE programs, with programs being at least 3 units of sequential CTE coursework aligning with a specific zip code. And these were taught in 2016. As shown, the number of CTE programs peaked in 2016 with 1,857, increased slightly since then to 1,790 in 2020. This table breaks down CTE programs by service area and shows that applied science, technology, engineering, and manufacturing is the most common service area, with 595 programs taught in 2020. By contrast, information solutions was the smallest service area with 83 programs provided in the same year. On a compound annual growth rate basis, information solutions has grown by 16.5%, followed by human services at 1.6% and human and health science at 0.9%. Business, finance, marketing, and management has decreased by 5.5%, while health sciences and agriculture and natural resources has decreased by less than 1%. The first chart on this slide displays secondary CTE enrollment since 2016. In 2020, there were 100,558 students enrolled in at least one CTE course, which is the highest in the past 5 years. Students who took at least one college credit contracted CTE course were identified as college credit CTE students. And this chart also presents the number of college credit contracted CTE students during the past 5 years. In 2020, 19,576 students, or 19.5% of total CTE enrollment, took at least one college credit contracted course, which is a 3.3% increase from the previous year. And then over the past 5 years, the secondary CTE participation rate in Iowa was approximately 66%. As shown in the second chart, the proportion of CTE enrollment in grades 9 through 12 increased from 66.5% in 2016 to 69.8% in 2020. And the change in CTE participation rate follows the change in total secondary CTE enrollment. The first chart on this slide shows secondary CTE enrollment by grade level. The pattern of CTE enrollment by grade level has been held steady over the past 5 years. Ninth graders were the largest group, averaging 28.8%, followed by 10th graders, averaging 25.7%, and students in grades 11 and 12 accounted for 23.8% and 21.8% of total CTE enrollment respectively. And then the second chart on this slide summarizes enrollment by service area and displays the change in enrollment by service area since 2016. Over the past 5 years, more students enrolled in courses in the human service area than in any other service area. And in 2020, 54,408 students took at least one course in this particular service area. Students enrolling in courses in applied science, technology, engineering, and manufacturing were also popular among high school students. 32,091 students took at least one course in this service area. And enrollment increased in all service areas except for information solutions from 2019 to 2020. Moving on to characteristics of secondary CTE students. Among all secondary CTE students, white students made up 77.6% of the student body. This first chart displays the proportion of white students and the proportion of minority students enrolled in secondary CTE programs. Percentage of minority secondary CTE students increased steadily from 19.1% in 2016 to 22.4% in 2020. Hispanic students comprise the largest minority group, averaging 48.3%, followed by Black students, which were an average of 24.9%, and then students who reported 2 or more races, averaging 14.3%. The second chart summarizes the enrollment of secondary CTE students by gender. Over the past 5 years, there were more male CTE students than female CTE students. However, the proportion of female students in secondary CTE slightly increased from 44.8% in 2016 to 45% in 2020. And the proportion, the last slide is the proportion of secondary CTE students who are eligible for the National School Lunch Program. The percentage fluctuated between 36.1% and 39.5% during the 5 years, and that peaked in 2020. This chart displays the distribution of CTE course taking, both secondary and college credit contracted courses per student since 2016. Between 2016 and 2017, approximately 44% of students who participated in the CTE program took one course in an academic year. Since 2018, this group of students has dropped to less than 35%. But the proportion of students who took 2 courses in an academic year was steady in the past 5 years at approximately 30%. Over 35% of students took 3 or more CTE courses since 2018, compared to less than 25% in 2016 and 2017.
This chart, does it distinguish if they are, is this by in 1 year, or is this throughout their high school career? Or?
This would be by year.
Okay.
Moving on to human resources. The first chart displays the number of full-time and part-time CTE teachers employed by school districts since 2016. The number of CTE teachers has grown by less than 1%, from 1,974 in 2016 to 1,983 in 2020. And the number of full-time CTE teachers increased from 1,832 to 1,860, which is a 0.4% compound annual growth rate. And the number of part-time CTE teachers decreased from 142 in 2016 to 123 in 2020. And then the second chart displays the number of full-time, adjunct, and part-time CTE faculty employed by community colleges and those teaching college credit contracted CTE courses since 2016. The number of community college CTE faculty teaching high school students decreased by 1.4% from 2,094 in 2016 to 1,976 in 2020. Unlike secondary CTE teachers who are employed by school districts who are mainly full-time, approximately 70% of the community college CTE faculty teaching high school students were adjunct or part-time. And the proportion of full-time community college CTE faculty was less than 1/3, and the number of full-time CTE faculty decreased by 3.3%. This next area of information is on work-based learning. And this chart presents the number of work-based learning courses since 2016. As you can see, the number of work-based learning courses has grown by 18%, which is compound annual growth rate from 101 courses in 2016 to 196 courses in 2020. This chart does also show the percentage of college credit contracted work-based learning courses out of all work-based learning courses. And the percentage of college credit contracted work-based learning courses peaked in 2018 and decreased to 19% in 2020. And then these are just some student characteristics on work-based learning. Each year, over 2/3 of all students who have taken work-based learning courses were 12th graders. And students in 11th grade were the second largest group. And not many 9th and 10th graders participated in work-based learning. Though male students traditionally outnumber female students in the general CTE courses, which I presented earlier, it was interesting to discover that among all students who took work-based learning courses, more than half were female, which is depicted in the second chart. Regarding race and ethnicity, findings were consistent with the general secondary CTE student population. Over 80% were white students. And finally, the fourth chart depicts the percent of work-based learning students who were eligible for the National School Lunch Program. And finally, highlighting the work in our regional centers. In 2020, we had 19 regional centers providing 183 career academy programs to 6,150 high school students from 110 school districts. Among the 19 regional centers, 6 are located on community college campuses. And then within those, we have the career academy service areas with applied science, technology, manufacturing at 71, followed by health science 32, information solutions 28, business, finance, marketing, and management was 21, and agriculture, food, and natural resources were 8. So in summary, over the 5-year period, and some of this is additional information that's within the report, the CTE participation rate has risen along with college credit contracted courses. CTE programs in the information solutions area have grown. There's been an increase in the percentage of students taking 3 or more CTE courses. The number of secondary CTE students by gender is getting more even. Work-based learning courses have risen sharply since 2018, and women participate in greater proportion than men in work-based learning than general CTE student population. So that is my report, and I know it's a lot of information and a lot of statistics that I just presented, and there's a lot more good information in our report.
Thank you.
Excuse me. Well, I don't know how to say this, and maybe Jeremy can also help me with this, but a few years back, there was a restructuring of the career and technical education program through legislation. And At that time, I think it attempted to move more information into 6th, 7th, 8th grade areas. And I don't see maybe it is significant, but just on the charts, it doesn't seem like there's a significant growth in the career and technical education participation that I think I would have expected from the redesign that we had.
Yeah, no, it's a really good question, Mike. Yeah, so House File 2390 was passed 5 years ago. So this kind of data gives you a picture of what we've done well. And you can see we had tremendous success with regional centers, expanding career academies, up college credits, 43%. The types of programs students are enrolling in, there's been a huge shift that's kind of hidden in the data, right? From more traditional CT programs to ones where students are working with advanced CNC machines or advanced healthcare mannequins that bleed all over you, and you're doing information technology programs, which are fantastic. But the areas where we struggle, so you see the career and academic planning data, not enough students are doing the career and academic planning activities that we'd like them to see. Our middle school activities are not exactly where we want them to be, right? So with Perkins 5, we have built into the plan some strategies to try to ramp up those activities. And so we're working on strategies that are likely to increase completion rates and increase post-secondary going rates like the CTSO work, getting students engaged in those co-curricular activities, and our investments in college and career transition counselors to help support students in doing those, developing those plans and making the post-secondary transitions that we can see. So no, I think you're right in identifying that the middle school is an area where we need to come back and re-emphasize that and do more work there. I feel it's fun, I'm not saying the kind of change that we were hoping to see, but we are seeing that change in other areas. The work-based learning, right? It's going through the roof, and some other areas we're having information technology programs are soaring, which is something we've got a new staff person coming in for information tech here in just a couple of months. So, so progress in some areas, challenges in others.
Thank you.
Questions? Thank you so much.
Thank you.
I'm gonna go grab our guests.
Okay,
Well, she's grabbing her guest, kind of in response to something Georgia said. Jeremy, do you want to mention, and I don't have my notes from our community college meeting, but the $2.9 million that was, I think it's 2.9 million for non-credit training and so forth. You might want to let the board know that.
Sure. Yeah, really excited about it. So there, with Carissa, there are gear funds that are available. K-12 cycles are going to mental health, and there are 2.9 million of that gear fund was set aside for community college. Yeah, the community college gap tuition assistance program. Basically means non-credit, short-term job training in high-demand areas, truck driving, welding, CNA, getting adults in particular quickly upskilled in those areas. So really excited about the investment there, the expansion of student opportunities, and our ability for the next couple of years to really get a lot of people the training they need to get the jobs that employers need in there.
Thanks.
You bet.
hi, how are you?
Are you turning it over here now?
Go ahead, introduce this.
Oh, no, you can.
Oh. Okay.
Brad gave you the gavel. Go ahead.
Our chair needs to leave early, so I guess it's the ball's tossed in my court. So welcome Davenport Community School District and Amy again. Tell us what's going on.
Great, thanks. So I don't have very much to say, and then we'll let these gentlemen talk. So this month is, this is your monthly update on how Davenport is doing on their action plan. And then I think that we've been so informal calling TJ for so long, but Superintendent Schneckloff has some updates on the district hiring. Because we talked about that last time we were together, and that's been the focus of a lot of their effort right now. So In your packet, you have the update sheet that we provide you with every meeting. Davenport has taken the lead on filling out all of the information. We used to kind of do it collaboratively, and now they've really taken over filling out all that information. And I just confirm with them before we put it in your board packet. But I think the one thing that I would probably draw your attention to this month is that, you know, everything has some movement on the goal areas. And we are drawing to the end of another academic year. And so it's time for us to just, what we did this time last year, even though we were starting a pandemic, is department staff sat down with district staff and board members and just sort of revisited this and made sure that everyone was comfortable with the goals and that we kind of knew what we were heading into for the following year. And I think that when you hear from TJ on the status of their hiring, you kind of understand that it might be good for us to do that as they're onboarding new staff members so that we don't get too far ahead of having new people be part of understanding what the goals look like for next year is kind of what I'm thinking. So I don't think the goals are changing, but we also probably want to have that sit down at a reasonable time when it's, you know, Director Lebo and the appropriate people from Davenport. But if they're going to have new people starting, maybe do it after they start so that we can all be there together.
Can I ask kind of a procedural question? Because I don't remember exactly how the motion to start this process was made, but this is an ongoing process and still until the board is satisfied that we no longer need to do that process, or do we need to restate that periodically?
Oh, good question. So there are actually two processes that are sort of running tandem right now for Davenport to be conditionally accredited. So the first is that you voted to have them conditionally accredited, which is an ongoing process that you should revisit at least annually. Code is not specific on how often you need to revisit that. It doesn't really contemplate that it would be any specific duration. So what the process actually says, a district is visited, there's a report given to the director that goes to the board with a recommendation. There's a corrective action plan. The district is visited again. Another report goes to the director with a recommendation to the board, and the board decides to have a district, and this could happen to an AEA too, the same process, conditionally accredited, unaccredited, or continuing accreditation. There's no real time period specified there, but I don't think it would be good practice to not revisit that at least annually. So now you have been doing that though. But you most recently revisited that this academic year when you determined that you would actually do the other process that's kind of, it's not a different process, but kind of parallel. You determined that you would take a further step that's embedded there, which is to give Director Lebo the partial operational authority over the district. And that's within your authority as the board overseeing the conditional accreditation in order to bring a district into compliance. The same sort of mechanism exists for any accredited body that you oversee. So I guess that's a really long-winded way of saying where we are in the process is you've done what you need to do in terms of reviewing for this year, but you do need to continue to review that. The next time we have set up for you to review that would be at the November meeting for next academic year.
Thank you.
Any other questions?
No.
All right, then I'm
Not
gonna
that-
turn it over to the gentleman.
So two things that I would like to share with you. The first one involves our youth leadership teams. I was really looking forward to seeing our student board member because I believe it might have been October, November when she spoke about the importance of that.
Mhm.
We had our kickoff for that. I want to say it was 2 weeks ago, and it was probably so far the highlight of the year for me. We did it in Zoom, and every one of our schools, we broke it down into elementary, middle school, and high school. We had the process for selecting students in a very diverse way. Picking students that represent the entire school. And it was neat to be able to bounce back and forth between the Zooms, and it was kicked off with music and a very well laid out process that they learned. And the feedback that came off of that first day was out of this world. I'll use a counselor that's been with us for 23 years said that was the most exciting day they've ever had in their professional career. And we had parents posting to Facebook, and it was something that we were nervous about, but at the same token, exactly why we're on the journey we're on to incorporate more student voice. So that was an absolute highlight, and it's very interesting to me. So that I had one school that I had received probably 60 emails, and it was the same email asking if we could push the end of school back earlier. And so you could tell what their priorities were in their youth voice because of things they wanted some of their summer back. So it allowed me to interact with our students in a positive way and alert them to, how school hours are counted and things of that nature. So it was a very positive thing. And definitely a part of our crisis response violence prevention piece to where we're starting to move into a proactive arena, which is positive, which you've heard us speak about. The other thing is our hiring process. We've gone through a very rigorous hiring process. Last time we were here, we shared the new structure, and we are getting ready to move forward with hiring our candidates. Right now, we were in the process of onboarding or hiring those candidates, background checks, contracts, things of that nature, and moving forward at one of our board meetings very soon at the guidance of Dr. Williamson. And so we feel very confident about the individuals that we are bringing on, and excited to turn the page in that chapter, because that's been a very difficult part of our year. But at the same point, going in a new direction. So I'm excited, nervous about moving forward that way, but we do have a plan in place for onboarding. It's been broken down into phase 1, phase 2, and phase 3. And I think we're in phase 2, starting to move towards phase 3 of the onboarding of staff members, which I'm very excited about. So that's an update from our hiring of our cabinet positions.
Very cool.
The AEA has been instrumental in helping with the hiring process. I know that Shane Williams is on Zoom. In case you have any questions, we can definitely.
Shane and Bill are.
I didn't know if Bill was on or not. They can chime in if you have any particular questions.
We are at the SAI. I forgot I have my lanyard on. We are at the SAI Standards Institute right now. So,
Oh, nice. Is that virtual?
no, it's in person at the FFA building in Aiken.
Oh, wow. Okay.
It's very refreshing to see people face. I haven't.
I'm sure.
Don't get to talk to Amy face to face right here.
No, I try to keep my distance.
So how does the hiring affect your budget, your finances? I mean, you've obviously budgeted for those positions and.
Yes, it's an excellent question. So when we had our early retirement in February, so in order to make sure to ensure that we were on pace for our budget, we offered a mid-year early retirement, and we had some people from central office take that. And so that allowed us some freedom and some movement. And what we've done with our new CFO is we've run that through the finance committee, which is being overseen by Gary Sinclair, who's our financial advisor right now, appointed by Dr. Lebo. And so that's the checks and balances to ensure that we're not overdoing it in that region.
I don't have that in front of me. Did I see that you're trying to reduce your budget by $5 million in the coming year? Or did I misread something?
I think a while back, we had set some targets for them in terms of what reductions would need to look like. So that was probably an earlier meeting.
Okay.
So I think as they continue to have oversight of where they're at, I think that's already kind of been built into some of the decisions they've made and what it might look like going forward. That was probably earlier this fall when we did sort of a target goal of what we have to look at.
Dr. Lebo gave us benchmarks. So while we were establishing our line item budget, we were given $5 and $10 million cuts. So we built plans that met both of those marks.
Good. Thank you.
The idea was be able to move the line as needed, knowing what would a 5 million look like, what would a 10 million look like, and you could slide the lever depending on what we actually saw. But just to have the understanding of what would have to happen or what potentially would need to happen, depending what we discover as we continue to walk through that process.
Are the families engaged in the community? Because I know there was a lack of engagement. How is that going?
That's our last citation, and what we've done in that area is we've established regular routine meetings with, I feel like I need to turn. Sorry.
Go ahead.
So what we've done, this isn't a very flattering angle, sorry. What we've done in that area is we've started to engage our community members. So President Goza and I have gone and met, and now we, with NAACP, LULAC, we're going to city council meetings, things of that nature. Where we are now is we're determining which metric to use to hit the 80% mark, which is a very lofty goal. And so the conversation piece is, and that's on our agenda for the next week or so, which we have to decide very soon. Is it going to be the conditions for learning family piece, or is it going to be a different venue to gather that 80% piece? There's also in the upcoming parts of our plan in terms of PBIS, things of that nature, there are family committees that are both at the building level and at the district level. We continue to have our community violence response team that has different community agencies on it, things of that, and that's going really well. We've learned a lot about what's available in our community during a crisis and and it has been a game changer, honestly, that community piece there. And we've also kind of ramped up our LCAC committee, and they're getting ready to really start tightly aligning to our board goals. But a next step in that is to determine, is it the conditions for learning family survey that we're going to utilize, or are we going to use a different method to gather all of that input?
Okay, thank you. Maybe another district has a metric that they use, so you don't have to start from scratch, but thanks for the update.
That's a good point. Thank you for that.
Are there any areas that you need to bring to our attention? I mean, that you're concerned about, Amy or Anne, or?
Go ahead.
No, I think one thing as we sort of work through this process is figuring out, how far our authority extends in terms of decisions. And so we really try and tie it to the specific authority that was given to us by the board and how it aligns with the citations. And so, meeting twice a week, it's easy to start thinking about the decisions and input. We're trying to support the district. How far does our authority extend? If we see concerns, I think the next step would be that we would bring that back to the board to determine if we would need you to extend our authority, but still allowing some of the powers that live within the district to sort of balance what our role is, especially if you look at hiring and some of the things that have to be decided at the local level. So it's balancing that oversight with support and making sure we kind of keep the lines clear on what that looks like. But these updates, I think, for you guys are really helpful to make sure we don't have something that pops up that we weren't prepared for, that wasn't expected. And I think that's probably what has kind of happened in the past. So this opportunity to ask questions and for us to meet with them regularly, I think is really important. Were you going to add something else?
No. Okay.
Okay, this specific report really helps give some clear definition in terms of progress. And the rest is sort of ancillary and how you get there. So this is the piece you get to see that is measurable, but there's a lot behind that in terms of how we get there. So it's helpful that they come and have the opportunity to share what they want to share, explain questions you might have to really back up the work that's in here. But this is quite an extensive effort just with a lot of people involved in terms of the teams that we have in place for support. And then planning for what that will look like going forward as we talk about new hires, what the support from this team looks like to support the district to make sure they're successful and their work aligns with those expectations. That will be forthcoming, that you'll see. And I think partly why it's important for us to meet with staff as they talk about onboarding and just kind of the expectations that might be a little unique for this particular situation.
It will be very nice to be able to meet with people face to face again. Director Lebo and I have been able to physically go to the district one time. And so being able to, I used to drive over to Davenport quite often, and I actually like doing that. So.
And just to have the positions in place that are aligned with the work and to get those individuals on board and start driving that work down that path, I think will be very encouraging as well.
Early on in this process, special ed was a big issue, and it looks like you've accomplished the goals there that were set out, and that's good because that directly affects us. So good work on that.
And we have a hand raised from one of the attendees. Would they be able to ask a question?
I don't know that if it's not during public comments that they would be allowed to engage with the board.
Okay.
So I don't think that would be allowed, but thank you for checking.
Is it Bill Ducker by any chance?
It is.
Oh, then Bill can speak. Bill, sorry, I should have asked that first. Yes.
Oh, it's better that you didn't ask.
Yes, Bill.
Bill can speak.
Jump in.
Thank you. One of the things that I think is important to share happened just earlier this week, and that is around the development of the board. So there was a committee of the whole meeting on Monday night, and that meeting was exclusively put on by IASB, another board development session. And I will just say this to the state board. If you had attended a board meeting back in September or October, and you observed the committee of the whole meeting on Monday, you wouldn't have thought it was the same board. I would just have to give my highest compliments to the way board leadership has attacked the job that they're charged with, and the board as a whole for just really taking to heart the process with IASB. Just a very reflective conversation on Monday, and the idea of bringing IASB into the picture is awesome if people commit to it, but they can also just not pay attention and keep acting in the same way that they had before. Well, the Davenport board has certainly chosen the first option, and it is very visible. So I did want to make sure that you as a state board understood the development that has gone on with the local board.
Thanks, Bill.
Thank you.
Oh, go ahead.
Actually, I was going to say the same thing that you were going to say. President Goza has put together a process with IASB and Harry monthly. So if you would mind sharing with that, as I think that's making a big difference in the development.
I don't really like to toot my own horn. We meet with IASB, Harry and Luann usually every last Thursday of the month to kind of plan for our upcoming board meetings on how to structure it, because obviously you have 7 different people, and you kind of, when you have discussions on things, you need to make sure you hit things to resonate with all 7 people. Because obviously we all have different interests and things like that. So we've been working on that a lot, and then we have it set up now where
at one meeting, we'll have a discussion, and then the next meeting, we'll actually vote on it, whereas before it was, you're getting this thing Friday at 5 o'clock, you're voting on it Monday night at 6 o'clock. And there was never no time to look at anything or ask any questions. It was very rushed, which obviously that's why we're in the position we're in. So we worked very hard on that. Obviously, sometimes some things come up, and then we have the superintendent put things in reports. I would say Phoebe and I probably talk more often than I talk to my wife sometimes. And then if I don't hear from him, I have to leave him a voicemail that I miss him. And why is he mad at me? But it's having that good relationship as well as with the board. And then if he lets me know something, I can onboard the board and call them and let them know, hey, this is some things that are going on. And that's just things we've never had. I probably put way more hours into it than I should, because obviously we don't get paid for this. But at the end of the day, we do it for the kids and the betterment of our district and community, because as the schools go, so do the community. And it's been great working with our community partners. NACP, which I am a member of, and I'm a member of LULAC because I believe in those organizations, and we should always have a seat at the table with them. Our local city government, we meet with elected officials and things like that, because at the end of the day, we all have to be working for the same thing. Otherwise, we're working kind of against each other. And if we don't know what's going on with one, then they don't know what's going on with us. But the ISB has been a huge asset for us. And it's just a matter of, we've always had that, but we've never utilized it the way we should have. And now we're doing that, even much so that I'm gonna work with them on doing board onboarding and training. So when we do get new board members, because there's certain things that you don't know. And then if you do things or you go over the superintendent to try to ask other staff members, well, then you're taking away from what they're assigned by the superintendent to do, but they're looking into your things. So you're taking away from things. And then to get the board more aligned with when they're asking, for board requests on certain things. Well, if you're not going with the board goals, then you're kind of taking things away from the things that we should be focusing on, and being a lot more open and transparent with things as we have been. Board requests have kind of went down, the board's more informed, and I think we have better board meetings and things like that. But all of our board members are working well together. When, we first started out, I couldn't necessarily say that, but I think we all work very well together and complement each other, because obviously you have 7 different aspects and 7 different, minds, 7 different egos and all those things. And it's just getting everybody to work together for the same thing. Everyone has an ego, and don't ever let anybody tell you. But it's just the way it is. And it's able to, work for the betterment of the kids. And that's what we're here to do. So that's why I drive 5 hours to come up here and show the board's commitment to this. And usually we ride together, so we get a lot of windshield time to do a lot of things, but I get to make a lot of phone calls for my job too, so it works out. So, but we're committed to this, and that's why we show up for these, to show you all that. I don't think that previous board leadership took it as serious as we should, but we're working on that. So
Good. It sounds like you've made tremendous progress as a board.
we're trying.
Well, in that regard, D and E, and maybe this is for you, Amy. I just wonder, it looks like there's a lot been going on in areas D and E, and yet they're rated like 1 for status.
Sure.
Can you give me maybe?
So those are the D and E, for those of you listening who don't have it in front of you, are MTSS and PBIS implementation. And for the educators who are listening and cringing, because PBIS is a component of MTSS implementation, we know. But we have them broken out because we wanted to really focus on the positive behavior interventions and supports for E. The reason that there's a lot going on and they're still rated low is, and TJ and I have talked about this at length.
Okay.
These are the heaviest lifts. These are the biggest areas. And I think that we used a graphic last board meeting, I think it was, that I can bring back for you all at some point to show where most of the work has to be done for all of these pieces. And it's really in these two areas. So even though there may be a lot of work that happens, getting it all done and really hitting those goals is the hardest here. It's just harder to move because there are whole states that have worked for decades on these and not gotten the needle to move terribly far. So for a district the size of Davenport to change direction on these areas is going to be difficult. And we knew that when we said these are the things that you need to do. But fundamentally, a couple of the problems that they're trying to solve, one of them being disproportionality, are really only going to be like solved by implementing MTSS and PBIS effectively. The other things that those really do or take care of disproportionate suspensions and expulsions and really the disciplinary issues that you have to face at all as a district. And they're having so many of them that teachers are feeling like they don't have time to pay attention to instruction. And so these are heavy lifts.
I mean, do you really, I mean, these are all a continuum, you know, you never stop working on any of these areas. So we just want to get to a certain point and then continue on. That's true for number F as well, the engage. I mean, it sounds like that's commenced, but I don't know when you say that's finished.
Yeah, and just to be clear, because I know like this board is different than it was when Davenport first started visiting us. And so, and Davenport's board is different too. There was never any expectation that every single thing on this list be fully implemented with 100% fidelity. So before the district may have their full accreditation back. The expectation is that the action plan is completed to the satisfaction of the State Board of Education. This is a state board decision. And the state board decision was that this is the plan that needs to be implemented.
I recall that.
Right?
That was
Okay,
like my
so
first meeting.
I just want
Welcome to the state board.
That it's clear that there's no expectation that Davenport does more than any other district in the state in order to be fully accredited.
Yeah.
So as we come back and revisit this with progress, when we come back in November, there'll be an update. And so then there'll be sort of a recommendation discussion of, well, how do you feel their progress is in terms of where we want them to be? And that will be when we have that opportunity to have that conversation with the idea that it's not, everything is perfect and finished, as you mentioned.
Thank you.
It's all about progress.
That's for sure.
And I think, listening to both of them speak as well, really reinforces the amount of time and the lift that this requires of everybody to make that systemic change and to keep it going. And then our obligation to ensure that they're successful in that process as well, and the support that we can provide. So you're seeing progress each month. And it is a lot of work and it does take a lot of time. And I think the bigger the lift, the bigger the commitment and our responsibility to help them get there. But I think each time it's encouraging that you're seeing forward momentum. And I think that's important.
Well, I appreciate the attitude as well, as far as taking a difficult situation and turning things around. I've been impressed with what I've seen. My question now goes to next fall. What's in general? What's the plan for moving forward?
Why don't you start?
Well, the big thing that we have to determine is a part of our plan. What's the natural next step to take and tackle a part of our plan? So I'm very excited about having that conversation with Dr. Lebo and Amy. There's some natural fits, but the main thing that we've learned this year is that right now we do not have, I'm going to use the Shane Williamson word. We do not have the ability for simultaneity. So to think we can do 2 or 3 things at once, we haven't been successful at that. So we really have to ensure the hard work that we've done before, during, and after a crisis maintains, because the safety of our students is number one. And then picking the next right thing that dovetails into that, which is a part of our plan, is the next step. And knowing all of the things that we are in right now, for example, the unfinished learning, all of those things. And so I think there is a natural path, but we honestly haven't had a chance to discuss that. I'm very excited for that. Because I think that the next steps of okay, whether it be early literacy, whether it be the MTS, maybe it's a combination of both. We haven't talked about that. So the next steps will be very exciting. And the reason why I say they're going to be very exciting is because we now have a vehicle of how things work in our district. An example of that is how crisis response before, during, and after a crisis was rolled out in our district worked. It's effective. Unfortunately, we've had the opportunity to practice the things that we have done, unfortunately. And so we know that with a high level of fidelity, a very difficult task can be done with 14,500 students and 3,000 employees. I mean, every one of our employees have gone through this. So whatever that next right thing is for our plan, I know that it will dovetail, and I know that we have a system for putting it out. So I'm very confident in that. And I would say that we just haven't decided what the next step is, and maybe Dr. Lebo would need to know. But
Well, and part of that ties with that, the reorganization of what those positions to help align with their priorities. That's a big piece of this. So now, once that's in place, then you're able to fill underneath. And I think at this point, what they're still sort of living is disjointed priorities and positions that aren't aligned with what those should be. And so that will be a huge next step for them in the fall, and the details will fall underneath.
So if your crisis response plan has worked and you've had a chance to practice it, then it seems to me to follow that it's really important to work on PBIS in order to prevent those, so you don't have to put your crisis plan into place. Why is PBIS so hard? You said some states have spent years on it, Amy. What it sems like such
scaling.
a logical system to me. I don't
Well,
understand.
actually, that's not fair. It's a couple of things. It's more than just scaling, and I'll ask Brad to say what he has to say about those too. So from my perspective, like as a system, both anything about MTSS, whether you're talking about the academic implementation or the behavior implementation, is hard for two reasons. One is the fidelity and the sticking to it, because the thing is, all of it's hard. Like, it's just hard. The behavior piece is hard because part of it is when you're working with kids, not letting them learn behaviors that are incorrect, and then not like you have to keep with the correct things all the time, right? And so it's fidelity, and then it's constant measurement, and then it's constant looking at your data, and it's doing all of those things in the same way all the time. And if you stop, or you slack off, or you think, well, I don't really have to do that this week, then you will have drift. When people start implementing poorly, then it doesn't work anymore, right? And it's really pretty methodical. And it's the same with the academic piece, but I think the behavior piece and this is from an outsider who did not start in K-12 academics, I think it's a little bit less natural, frankly, than what people started doing with academics. That has been my observation. Brad?
Yep, so 100% agree with everything Amy shared. A couple of other reflections. One is schools, I mean, any organization, but we're talking about schools and districts right now. They are set up to do what they're doing now.
Mm-hmm. True.
And anytime we're asking for change, be it an individual person or a whole district, it's going to be harder to do the new thing, at least at the beginning, than it is to keep doing the thing you've been doing. It's just being really intentional about planning for change, supporting change, and part of what needs to go into that. And I think this feeds back into an earlier conversation about district progress, because a lot of good progress has been made. But part of that change process is having people who are in place to help coach and support and help people stick with it. And right now, I would argue that the district and TJ and staff and the board are doing the heavy lifting and the day-to-day work and have done great. They've made great strides with that. And I would also argue that part of the reason they've been able to stick with it is because there are a lot of voices behind them saying, we've got to stick with this and keep going. And that's part of the progress we've seen, is with a high level of support. And TJ's put this very eloquently in conversations that we've had offline, but it takes that for a while until we can get to a level of independence. The things we're doing differently now are now the normal. And it just has to be a really intentional, resourced process. And that when we see districts do it well, they've gotten over the hump. When those efforts sort of peter out, we never got over the hump. It wasn't because of bad intention or lack of skill or desire. It's just, I don't know about you, but I have a hard time doing, if I got to change something for me, right?
Yeah,
now,
exactly.
3,000 people, plus the community they serve.
Yeah.
I don't mean to paint an insurmountable picture. They're on their trajectory to doing this. But if your question is, why is it so hard? That's why it's hard.
To be completely fair to other communities too, like even if you walk into a classroom where they're over the hump and they're doing either the instruction that they need to do or the behavioral instruction that they need to do really well, it's still exhausting. Like at the end of the day, they are tired because you have to keep it up all day long. Like there's not a break where everyone colors, right? And I mean, they do color, but you don't get to like relax from the constant monitoring of it and the direct instruction. Like it's hard all day long.
Well, then you have to build up consistency among the staff too.
Yep.
Sure.
Well, and then, and at the end of the day, whoever's there, it should be able to sustain itself, no matter who the individual is, when leadership change or staff changes every year, so that no matter the people involved, the system continues to move forward. And that is the biggest piece. And I think we've said all along, this isn't about any of us who are at the table. It's about the future of the system and those that they serve. And it should be able to continue no matter who's at the table. And so that will be a big lift, and that will be the right thing to help keep them going forward.
So everyone who's listening is just gonna think that I said the kids don't get to color. They do get to color. The teachers still have to like.
Teachers don't get to color.
Vigilance.
I think Thomas wanted to add something.
One brief observation about the importance of state board support for this, that a successful large scale in a large district change requires about 5 years, which is longer than the average term of a school board member, twice as long as the average term of a state house member. And so within elected bodies, there's a lot of churn. And one of the things that Davenport has benefited from is a turnover in board and a turnover in the people who have the gavel at the board table. But this board, because of institutional memory and the fact that terms are long and terms are staggered, we're able to support, and the department is able to support Davenport beyond to sustain changes that might ordinarily be sacrificed or set aside every school board election. So the complexity and the length of time, to earlier points made, requires a longer time horizon than most folks are usually willing to commit to.
Sure. Other questions, comments from the board?
Just a quote that I've used over the years is, looking at change, I always told our staff is our school district is perfectly designed for the results we're getting.
There you go.
Good one.
So that sometimes it's redesigned. Well, thanks for coming in again. Thanks for the long drive. I take it you probably had to come by yourself this time.
Yes, ma'am. As long as it was a little more scenic, it would be better, but it's better than from Des Moines to Wichita, Kansas.
There's nothing.
Kansas City.
Thank you very much.
Thank you both.
Thank you.
Keep up the good work.
Okay, our next item has to do with our state board retreat planning, which is in June.
Thank you.
Is that right? June 10th and 11th. And
Yep, Jody's gonna hand out just a draft, and I'll explain to you why we sort of designed it this way once everybody gets a copy.
Thank you.
Can we email it to Jordan?
I did.
Okay, you guys got, all right, perfect.
Yeah, we've got it.
Okay, great. Does everybody have one? She hand you guys one?
I had one, so. John needs.
Okay,
Unless it's changed from what.
well, it
Send out
looks
the other day.
different, yes. Give her an updated one, please. So what we did is if you'll look at it, we took it sort of out of the agenda format because we were waiting for some follow-up on the NASB presenter when he would be available. Depending on whether or not he comes in person, it would change the amount of time he's here and some of the work that we might have him discuss. So if it was going to be virtual, it's going to be shorter and a more limited priority. If it's going to be in person, we're going to have him work through a couple projects with us. It would be a longer period of time. But what we wanted approval on was the topics. If you felt these were the right topics to cover in a day and a half, which would be the intended plan, there would be a dinner involved, have a work session as part of the dinner, stay provided for those that were able to stay overnight, so we could have a longer meeting and incorporate some of the work that we do as part of our dinner and still get you out of here in a day and a half. So as we look through this, a little bit is on the updates on, so NASB, we'll leave that sort of at the top and place it wherever, depending on the time. And I believe Brooke heard back from him, so we'll have to follow up on how long he's available. Social emotional health, the post-COVID-19 impact on students, reimagine schools with a student voice. Looking at Hannah to bring a group together to bring some input on that from a student perspective. An online learning demonstration. I know that's been a question of what that looks like for us to see. Legislative update and the state board's role with changing laws and rules. By the time we meet, we'll know where things are. And so we'll have a better understanding of what we need to do as a board and the impact that might be. State board priorities and goals. I think one thing we would like to really do is that we talk about, we redesign the goals, we talk about the goals, but as John always brings up, what are the steps that we're taking? And we want to get into the steps and we want to see how these are being interwoven with our actions. And I'd like to spend a little more time talking about that. And then just questions on our meeting schedule in general. Dates, calendar, frequency, and anything you might like to see change. On the business meeting, again, there will be obviously the Davenport update and rules and any other relevant information, but these are sort of the topics that we thought match some of the feedback we received, some of the priorities of the work that we're focused on and are timely in terms of what we'll know about these things when we meet in the summer. So questions or comments on what I've presented, anything you would like to add or strike? If not, these are the topics we'll use to format that schedule. And then once we know the exact timelines, we'll be able to send that out.
I don't know. I like these topics. And I really hate, I think we probably need a board building activity. And I'm generally not in favor of some of these activities that people come up with, but just something, because I'm going to assume this is probably the first time maybe all the board's going to be there in person, and perhaps the new board member will be there in person also. As a longtime board member, I'm sure this is the right word, cohesiveness of the board maybe is not what I've experienced time in the past. And of course, it's had to do with the pandemic and the distance learning and all that. And personally, I just haven't gotten to know board members like I think it's helpful to know. We don't have to agree on anything. We don't have to disagree on anything, but it's kind of just good to know who we're working with.
And that's actually one of the things we talked about when we met, of what that would look like. Potentially it might be something that the NASB individual was going to facilitate, but if not, we were going to do that something on our own. So yes, that will be something I think would be important, because we haven't all had the chance to engage like we normally would. And there has been some turnover and it has been different. And if there is a new board member, it'd be a great time to bring them sort of into the fold. So there will be something. I didn't indicate that clearly on here when I put this information on there, so I apologize for that. But yes.
I think the social time and dinner is important too. And for those of us who have to drive back and forth, that gets a little hard, but I think it's important to try to have everybody at that dinner as much as possible.
Shan, did you want to add something?
That's just what I was going to talk
Yeah.
about, is that we are going to have the dinner. We're going to have it at District 36 for some who have been here previously. And we do have a space, so we'll be able to move around a bit, and people, I think, will be able to socialize better. And it's just a nice environment, I think, for everybody to get to know one another.
Do you drive back specifically because your hotel isn't paid for?
Correct. I do cheap pay for it myself.
Anything about that?
I think we can do an exemption. If you live within 50 miles, the department generally doesn't pay for it, but it's happened before that if there's a form we can help you fill out.
Okay, and some of it is
We can
tied
talk about
to,
that.
yeah, the business actions of the meeting. And I think with the dinner and things, we can certainly look at how that extends to what we plan to do for the retreat. Yes, we will follow up on that.
Mike.
Well, how late would we typically go on a Thursday night?
What was it on the?
Like 10 to 5 and then dinner, and then starting at 8:30 is what we were talking about the second day.
So it would likely be, 7 or 8, depending if we do the dinner. And we have some different ideas on a presentation or work session with the dinner, depending on what that was. Consider it like a working dinner that would extend us a little bit longer.
So
Brooke was wanting to do the recognition as well.
Yeah, so if you remember, we had to say goodbyes to some board members, and we never had the opportunity to recognize them. So there was always conversation of when we came back, could that be part of the time that we recognize them? So incorporating that potentially with new board members and kind of a board work session moving forward could all be tied together in that evening session. Again, depending on the NASB, how they plan to be involved.
And if NASB is involved in person, that will take more of a predominance as far as.
Yes.
So then, is this list of topics gonna have to be narrowed if they're here the whole time?
Not necessarily, because just how long we have each presentation go, and then some of the board work we were talking about would be tied in with his work. And so things that I was going to add separately would fit within that. It's not just a separate category. So we had kind of both models laid out, and that's why we ended up just taking it off. So this should all be in place and have time for in that day and a half, regardless of his availability.
It'll be important for Jody to be there for dinner. Take
Yes,
notes, or-
but she can. Come back for dinner, Jody.
I don't know that I can. If I can, I will.
Yeah.
Director Lebo, in regards to the discussion for our board priorities and goals, can you also align, have that discussion about how we align our goals and priorities? How does it complement the Department of Ed priorities and strategies and goals? Sometimes it's not very clear to me if we're all on the same page.
Sure, you bet.
Okay, thank you.
Align. That's a great tie into what, the priorities, even some of the priorities Brad talked about today, would fit in well with some of that work that we have to do together also.
Yeah, I would have given the education gap we talked about today. Should that be part of this?
I'd like to suggest that be a work session for us, maybe October. I'd like September, but that's pushing them a little bit. So, that would give us some extra time if we did it as a work session.
And I think,
what do you think of that, Brian? Is that?
I just see the exigency of doing something soon, but I'm open to that. it just seems like it's such a big topic, it doesn't fit well in a board meeting.
Yeah, it doesn't in a regular board meeting.
And I think some of the things, even some of that achievement gap is gonna be an offshoot of what we talk about in terms of how we address the social, emotional health and well-being. You know, those are all in the same priorities. And as you fix one, how does it help support the other?
I wondered if that was gonna be.
Yeah, so there'll be a little bit of it there. It's almost like that's a piece of the bigger picture of how we recover. And then if you look at what our goals are, if we tie them to the priorities that Brad shared, you'll see a piece of that as well. But
Okay.
it sounds like maybe you want a deeper dive into that. And I think that will be an ongoing issue. So, you know, it may or may not need to be at the retreat. This one maybe is a little more narrowed on pieces of that progress. We can certainly bring it up and have a special work session later on. Again, we'll come back to the early work session meeting. That might be a nice time for that, maybe in the fall, as we kick off the year. What we're really implementing. Okay.
I appreciate that.
I'm an implementer and I like numbers and I like tangible results. Is it possible in our discussion, we can all talk about what's our deliverable that we bring to the board and to the, you know, like there's a deliverable that we keep all of us accountable for. And I think that's probably in part of that state board priorities, because we all have these, we're subject matter experts in these different areas and we bring these different perspectives. But to hold me accountable, I find that when I have to bring my report back to you all, it's in front of my radar, and I best believe I'm going to try to show progress. I just want to create more accountability.
So that might fit in when we talked about, so we have these board goals, but we don't have the action steps behind it. Maybe that's part of the conversation when we talk about what we want to look like. Maybe there's we have a conversation on what we want board members to bring to the table in terms of what actions items are. So I'll make a note of that next to when we talk about the state board priorities and goals.
Okay, thank you.
This is going to be at Ankeny at the.
Yes.
Where it's always been. Okay.
And I have the sleep in as holding rooms. I think you liked that place okay a couple years ago.
Sure.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I'll send all that out, you know, before once.
I'll just drive it back.
Okay. I usually do too.
Well, it's a quick drive.
Well, it's quicker for me and I don't want to. If I go to a social hour and I want to socialize.
It's okay.
And this,
Good for you.
just so everyone knows, I think Betty knows this, the Community College Council is
It's the day before.
scheduled to meet the Wednesday night before.
Okay.
But in the past, unless there's some actionable thing we have to do, we just don't meet. So I don't think that'll be an issue unless something comes up.
Okay. Okay, other feedback or does this look good? I've made notes of your suggestions. It's not an action item because we're not approving anything, but I just wanted to go through the topics with all of you if you're comfortable with that.
I think it sounds good. So I think we're ready to adjourn,
The motion,
I guess.
I'll move that we adjourn.
Second. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed. Meetings adjourned
Thank
for
you.
today.
Awesome.